A little over a year ago, towards the end of competitive Halo 5, a new advanced technique had begun to rise in popularity. Known as the spring jump, this technique allowed players to jump higher, move faster, and more quietly. However, it's very, very difficult to pull off consistent spring jumps, so difficult that most pros just chose to ignore it, and only a handful actually tried to use it to their advantage. Now, today, competitive Halo 5 is over, and the capabilities of this technique were left unexplored. That is, until now. Some of us have still been grinding. I have still been grinding. I've learned a ton about the spring jump, and finally, I feel like I've started to master it. In today's video, I'm going to tell you everything I know about this technique. All the tricks, all the secrets, how it works, the advantage it provides, and how it can fundamentally change the way this game is played at a high level. And I mean, just look at the clips in the background. This is a perfect example. This is just a sample of what you can do with a spring jump. As you can see, you can do some pretty incredible stuff with a spring jump, but let's start with the basics. What exactly is a spring jump, and what is the advantage that it provides? Now, in a nutshell, it's a higher altitude jump that is performed by very precisely timing your jump and your crouch mechanics, and I'll demonstrate on controller. The first step in the process is to jump, hold crouch, land on the floor in crouch. After you land on the floor in crouch, the next step is to release crouch and then jump, just like that. So jump, hold crouch, land on the floor and crouch, release crouch, and then jump, and you get a spring jump. And that's two right there. Standard jump, spring jump. You can see it's higher. Now, it seems pretty simple and basic, but the difficulty comes from the timing between releasing crouch and pressing jump. You actually have one frame to do this. It's a 60 FPS game, and one frame is about 16 milliseconds. So you have about 16 milliseconds to release crouch and then jump to hit this technique perfectly. And it gets even more difficult, and I'll shout out my viewer, Luculent, he'll probably be in the comments, who knows the stats of this a little better than I do. It seems that if you perform it too quickly, if you perform the release of crouch and then the pressing of jump about 5 milliseconds within each other, or faster than 5 milliseconds, it might not work as well. It seems like the two inputs override each other, and it doesn't work if you do it too fast. If it's past the 16 millisecond mark, it might not work because it's too slow. So there's a very precise timing, and I'll break that down further. I'm going to try to showcase the exact timing of the spring jump on my controller here, and I'll break down the specific method that I use to master it. Now, first of all, note that the image of myself is mirrored. This is a regular controller. This is the right side of the controller, not the left side of the controller. This is a mirrored image, so don't let that confuse you. And I'm going to change my control scheme here to something where both jump and crouch are on face buttons. That way it's easier for you to just kind of see the timing of it. And I would recommend doing this even if you're not on, like, let's say Southpaw, for example, or Fish Stick, something where you have crouch and jump on the face buttons, just so you can get the timing down first. You want to jump, hold crouch, land on the floor and crouch, and then all you have to do is flick your finger from B to A, just like that. And you can see the timing right here. All right, so this is what you can do to get the timing down. Once you've got that down, the next step is to apply that timing to whatever your control scheme is. Now, unfortunately, depending on your control scheme, spring jumping could be way more difficult. I personally use bumper jumper, and at first glance on bumper jumper, it's very challenging. The process is to jump with the left bumper, hold the left stick to crouch, and then you have to release left stick, followed by pressing left bumper with perfect timing to spring jump. The issue with this method is that your hand has to do this very counterintuitive opposite action where you're forced to release your left thumb and clench with your left index finger to press the bumper simultaneously. This opposite action I find is very difficult to get down to muscle memory. It's just very challenging. So I have a special trick. If you're a bumper jumper player or a hell jumper player, this trick will work for you, so you're in luck. And I say give it a try, see how it works. But instead of releasing your left thumb, what you want to do is jump, hold the crouch, and then flick upwards like that. So as you can see, I'm hitting the jump, and instead of pulling back on my left thumb to release the left stick, I'm flicking upwards, which at the same time releases the left stick. That flick process is releasing the left stick, but I'm tricking my hand into thinking that I'm not doing a releasing motion. Instead, I'm doing two actions that complement each other. It's a flicking motion. It also means that for a very short period of time, every one of my spring jumps move forward a slight inch because I'm doing a very quick flick forward. But as long as you can reset that stick to neutral, it doesn't change the spring jump too much. And once you get that timing down, you can start to hit it without really even thinking about it. Like you can see me hit quite a few in a row here. So pretty great just to get that down to muscle memory. Now, if you don't use bumper jumper, if you don't use hell jumper, I was thinking there might be a way around it if you still use the left stick to crouch. Let's say you have a button on the paddles that lets you jump underneath, then maybe you can apply that technique with the left stick still. Maybe you can flick upwards while simultaneously pressing the paddle to try to, have the same result. It's the idea in the end of the day is to find a technique that gets it down to muscle memory so that you don't have to think about it. It doesn't become as challenging anymore and the timing becomes easier. Now, if you don't play on bumper jumper or hell jumper and my method doesn't work for you, there is another very well-known way to spring jump. It's called the scoreboard spring jump. I am personally not a very big fan of this technique. I find it kind of cheap. Basically, it takes advantage of a mechanic in the scoreboard. The scoreboard in this game has this capability of holding your inputs in place while you put it up. So what I mean is that if I hold crouch and then I hold scoreboard, if I release the crouch but scoreboard's held down, the crouch is still active. It's holding my input in place as long as the scoreboard is up. Once I release the scoreboard, it'll frame perfectly release all inputs that I was holding down. So my crouch immediately releases and I immediately stand, right? You can stand up the moment you let go. So consistent with that notion, if I jump and hold jump and crouch in the air, and then I hold the scoreboard and I release the crouch, but I keep jump held down, the moment I release that scoreboard, it'll frame perfectly release crouch, but frame perfectly jump at the same time. So you spring jump every time. So jump, hold jump and crouch, hold the scoreboard, release the crouch with jump still held down, and then release the scoreboard, spring jump every time. Now, it's a little awkward to reach over and to scoreboard spring jump for some control schemes as well, but some players will map their scoreboard to a paddle on their controller, and then it kind of trivializes the technique. You can just kind of do it wherever you want, and it's going to 100% consistently work. You don't have to worry about the timing. The biggest issue with it, the disadvantage versus a standard spring jump, is you can't fire any shots while the scoreboard is up. So mastery of this technique would come with applying the scoreboard right before you hit the floor so that you spend minimal time in the scoreboard and more time with your gun ready to fire shots. If you can master just one of these methods, whether it's mine or scoreboard or whatever, and start to consistently and reliably hit spring jumps on maps, especially under pressure, you'll recognize it's a massive game changer. Not just in the height that you get from a spring jump, but in the flexibility and the efficiency you get when using spring jumps on maps. And an example is something like this, where typically this area you would have to stabilize to make this jump happen. You'd have to do a nice precise stabilized jump, and there's some difficulty, some timing and precision associated with this. You got to be looking at the ledge properly. If you get shot at any point in the stabilize, you'll get knocked out of the stabilize, you lose all your altitude and you fall. You're also appearing on the radar, you're also making noise. This is also just very risky in general because you're very vulnerable, so a lot of risks associated with going for this jump. But if you were to go for a spring jump instead, you get up there right away. You're not on the radar. You're way more quiet. If you take a shot at any point during that process, you don't lose altitude, and the jump is higher than a stabilized jump, so you can do more with it. So, of course, like this right here, jumping, landing, and crouch, setting it up can take some time, but as you get better at spring jumps, you start to become creative. You start to slide jump in, knowing you're planning on spring jumping, and then spring jumping and grabbing it immediately. And, of course, I'll mess it up as I try to explain it, but there, spring jumping and grabbing it, you get more quick at it. And you also have more flexibility to shoot and look at things. You spend less time turning and looking at the object you need to. And because you go higher, you can do it from farther distances away, from way farther away that you would normally have to with a stabilized. Just so much more convenience and flexibility. And that's even before we add the stabilize and we add the thrust to the mechanic. There's just layers on top of it. The spring jump becomes even more incredible if you combine it with mechanics like the thrust and the stabilize. Currently, the highest jump in the game is something known as the super jump or the bum jump. I've talked about it before. You have to sprint, thrust slide, jump, stabilize, mash crouch, and clamber. It's a pretty technical jump. You need space to pull it off. You need a runway to pull it off, and that runway needs to be flat. If the floor is uneven and your thrust slide gets disrupted, then the jump doesn't work at all. So kind of risky to pull off. What's crazy is the super jump actually isn't the only way to get up there. You can combine your spring jump with your thrust, something called a spring thrust. The spring thrust gets the same height as the super jump. Now, it's a very difficult technique. It's a spring jump, thrust, stabilize, mash crouch, clamber. So it's the second half of the super jump, but out of a spring jump. You have to frame perfectly thrust, stabilize, mash crouch, and clamber. But this fundamentally changes everything because you don't need a runway anymore. You can do it off of a standstill, and you can do it up to ring 3. The map is completely different now. I can get from the bottom of the map to the top of the map in a couple seconds now that I know this technique. It's a very challenging technique. You're going to have to practice it a lot to pull it off. But instead of, let's say, if you want to get up there, you might have to, like, super jump like this. Now you could get creative. You could just come at it from whatever angle you want. You could jump out from ring 2, land and crouch, spring thrust, stabilize, and you're up there. You're on ring 3. You get up there faster. You spend less time vulnerable, and you're in a power position. That is pretty incredible. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Note that it doesn't matter how high you fall from when landing on the floor to set up a spring jump. You could fall from 1 millimeter, land on the floor and crouch, and you're still ready to spring jump. So if you master the mechanic, you can start to use the map to your advantage. You can bump your head off of stuff and fall faster. Like this scenario, for example. I showed a stabilized jump, I showed a spring jump, but what I didn't show was bumping your head into a railing to get up there just like that. A very efficient alternative. Crazy what you can do. This one right here, it doesn't even look like I leave the floor, but as long as I input jump, it still counts. I still apparently left the floor, and I can still land and crouch and do a spring jump. This is exactly the same in trenches, and it's hard to see the roof above, but there's a beam above me. You can bounce your head off the beam, spring jump once, spring jump twice. There you go. You're up there nice and quick. Even on Plaza, you can bump your head off the wall here, spring jump, grab the sign, and you're up. And this one, Shotzi did a little while ago. You can bounce your head and then spring jump to get up to the catwalk right there. So many unique ways that you can use the map to your advantage to move faster. And it continues to get deeper. Recently, I figured out another way to set up spring jumps without even jumping. It involves sliding down slope surfaces. It turns out if you slide down any slope surface, your feet briefly leave the floor so you can spring jump. As long as you hold crouch after you slide, you're going to land on the floor in crouch and you can spring jump again, which is ridiculous. It's crazy how the mechanics work together so seamlessly, but just slide down a slope surface. There's a period of time where your feet leave the floor, so it's considered landing on the floor in crouch and you have a spring jump. I have no idea where you can set this up in the map, like where this might be useful or viable, like maybe sliding down something like that and spring jumping off it. You got to time the slide correctly so that you're sliding while you're going down the slope, but I'm sure there are certain locations where you can slide down a slope, set up a spring jump, use it to launch yourself forward, and then hit a jump that you may otherwise not be able to hit. So just the possibilities there just continue to become boundless. I'll end today's discussion on this note. It's something I've never seen any player truly implement into their gameplay, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. It's the fact that spring jumping and spring thrusting is truly omnidirectional. You can do it in any direction. So if you wanted to, you could spring thrust backwards, just like this spring thrust up to top tower. Would you ever need to do this? I'm not sure, but imagine if every pro player could do this. This wouldn't even be the same game anymore. All this talk about spring jumps makes me kind of wish we had a little more time with it on the competitive circuit. It just feels like there's some untapped potential with the movement that was never fully realized, but now you know everything I know about the spring jump. It's in your hands. You can decide if you want to master it. That's everything I got for today, guys. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think of the spring jump, whether or not you use it in your gameplay. If you have a method to the madness, let's keep the discussion going. I'll see you guys around.